I want you to take a moment and think back. Think back to the last time you walked into a room, stopped dead in your tracks, and realized you had absolutely no idea why you were there. Maybe you laughed it off. Maybe you told your spouse it was just another senior moment. But deep down, in that quiet place in your mind, there was a flicker of fear, a cold realization that something vital might be slipping away. I've seen that look thousands of times. Over 32 years in clinical research, I have sat across the desk from men and women just like you, people who are sharp, accomplished, and full of life, but they are terrified that their brain is betraying them. I remember a patient from back in the late 90s. His name was Arthur. Arthur was a retired structural engineer. He was a man who lived by the logic of blueprints and load-bearing walls. But he came to my office because his own internal structure was crumbling. He said, "Stephen, I can feel the lights going out. I'm still in here. But the connection to my memories is fraying. The doctor says it's just the march of time. But I don't feel old. I feel trapped." At that time, the medical establishment was obsessed with plaques and tangles. They were looking at the brain as if it were a computer with a software glitch. But as I looked at Arthur's history and his scans, I realized we were looking at the wrong map. Arthur didn't have a software problem. He had a fuel line problem. Today I'm going to take you inside the research that the 5-minute office visit simply doesn't have time for. We are going to talk about brain starvation. We are going to talk about why your carotid arteries are the most ignored longevity levers in your entire body, and why what you've been told about normal aging is a dangerous half-truth. Now, I have to be clear. I am a career researcher. I have spent 3 decades buried in the data and the clinical trials, but I am not your doctor. I don't know your specific history or your current medications. My goal today is to give you the scientific ammunition you need to take back to your physician. Never change your protocol without professional guidance. But if you are ready to stop managing your decline and start understanding your biology, then let's dive into the truth about why your brain is starving and how we can start to feed it again. To understand brain starvation, we have to understand the sheer, overwhelming demand of the human brain. Your brain is a metabolic furnace. Even though it only makes up about 2% of your body weight, it consumes roughly 20% of your oxygen and nearly 25% of your body's glucose. It never sleeps. It never takes a day off. Even when you are in deep slumber, your brain is working, cleaning, and repairing. And every single molecule of fuel required for that work has to travel through 2 main highways in your neck. The carotid arteries. Think of your brain like a high-performance engine, and your carotids like the fuel line. If that fuel line gets a tiny kink in it, or if the walls of that line start to get crusty and narrow, the engine doesn't explode, but it loses its horsepower. It starts to sputter. It can't handle the hills anymore. In the lab, we call this chronic cerebral hyperperfusion. It is a state of low flow that is devastating to your cognitive health. But because it doesn't cause a stroke immediately, the mainstream medical community often ignores it until it's too late. When I looked at Arthur's scans back in 1998, I saw something that changed my perspective forever. His carotids weren't blocked in the way a surgeon would care about. They weren't 90% shut. They were maybe 20% narrowed. But more importantly, they were stiff. When your arteries lose their bounce, a phenomenon occurs called turbulent flow. Instead of blood gliding smoothly toward your neurons, it tumbles and crashes against the vessel walls. This turbulence creates microscopic inflammation. But more importantly, it disrupts the endothelial glycocalyx. Imagine a lush microscopic forest lining the inside of your blood vessels. This is the glycocalyx. Its job is to act like a Teflon coating, making sure blood slides through without friction. But as we age, and as we are exposed to high sugar, high stress, and poor sleep, this forest is clear-cut. Without that protective lining, the blood flow slows down, and your brain begins to starve. It enters a state of metabolic crisis. Your neurons, which are the most energy-hungry cells in your body, start to go into a power-saving mode just to survive. And what do you experience? You experience that fog, that inability to recall a name, that feeling that your brain is buffering like a slow internet connection. Does that make sense? Because if you understand that your memory loss is often a flow issue and not a death of cells, it changes everything. It gives us a path forward. Now let's talk about why the standard of care is failing you. I've spent 30 years watching the pharmaceutical industry try to find a magic pill for memory. They've spent billions, and yet the results have been underwhelming at best. Why? Because they are trying to fix the engine while the fuel line is still clogged. In a typical medical checkup, your doctor will listen to your heart. They might even put a stethoscope to your neck to listen for a bruit or a whooshing sound. But if they don't hear it, they move on. But the data I've tracked since the early 2000s shows that by the time a doctor can hear a problem in your neck, you've already lost significant cognitive ground. We need to look at the micro-hemodynamics. We need to look at the 2024 research in the Journal of Applied Physiology, which shows that arterial stiffness in the neck is a better predictor of cognitive decline than almost any other marker we have. The industry wants to manage your symptoms. They want to give you a drug to help with focus. But they aren't asking why you lost focus in the first place. I call this the 7-minute gap. Your doctor has 7 minutes to see you. It takes 7 hours to explain the science of endothelial health. That's why you're here with me. We aren't looking for a band-aid. We are looking for the scientific smoking gun. And the smoking gun is arterial calcification and nitric oxide depletion. Let's get into the how. How do we actually address this? Based on my 32 years in the lab, I've broken this down into a 3-phase precision protocol. Phase 1. The environmental shift. This is what I call the invisible fix. And it starts with your breath. I've seen a direct correlation between carotid stiffness and mouth breathing, especially during sleep. When you breathe through your mouth, you bypass the nasal passages, which are your body's primary factory for nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. It is the chemical signal that tells your carotid arteries to open up and let the blood through. If you spend 8 hours a night mouth breathing because of congestion or sleep apnea, your carotids stay clamped. Your brain spends the entire night in a state of oxygen deprivation. It's like trying to water a garden with a kinked hose. My first recommendation? Tape your mouth at night, yes, mouth taping, or use nasal strips. Force your body to produce the nitric oxide it needs to keep those fuel lines open. Phase 2. The biological catalyst. This is where we talk about the specific compounds that the clinical data actually supports. Most people over 60 are told to take a baby aspirin or a generic statin, but they are missing the calcium traffic cop. Vitamin K2 as MK7. I want you to think about where calcium goes in your body. We want it in our bones and teeth. But as we age, the body starts to misplace it. It starts to dump calcium into our soft tissues, specifically the walls of the carotid arteries. This is called medial calcification. It turns your flexible highways into rigid concrete pipes. Vitamin K2 activates a protein called matrix glay protein. This protein's only job is to go into your arteries, grab the calcium, and kick it back into the bloodstream so it can be sent to your bones. I have reviewed studies from 2023 and 2024 that show high-dose K2, specifically in the range of 180 to 300 micrograms, can actually help maintain and even improve arterial elasticity. But As always, you must talk to your doctor. If you are on a blood thinner like warfarin, K2 is off limits because it can interfere with the medication's effectiveness. This is why the conversation with your physician is so vital. Phase 3, the maintenance protocol. This is the golden rule of longevity, and it's something I call pulse pressure awareness. Most people know their blood pressure numbers, 120/80, 140/90, but they don't know the pulse pressure, the difference between the two numbers. If your blood pressure is 150/70, your pulse pressure is 80. That is a disaster for your brain. A high pulse pressure means that every time your heart beats, a shockwave of pressure is sent directly into your neck. Because your carotids are stiff, they can't absorb that shock. So it travels all the way into the tiny, delicate capillaries of your brain. It's like taking a pressure washer to a spider web. It destroys the blood-brain barrier. We want your pulse pressure to be under 50, and the best way to do that, magnesium bisglycinate and L-citrulline. These aren't supplements in the traditional sense. They are biological precursors that help the smooth muscle in your arteries relax. Now, I promised you an industry secret warning, something that most health-conscious seniors do every single day, that is actually starving their brain further. It's antiseptic mouthwash. It sounds crazy, I know. But listen to the science. Your mouth is home to specific bacteria that convert nitrates from your food into nitrites, which then turn into nitric oxide in your blood. When you use a harsh, alcohol-based mouthwash to kill the germs, you are also killing your nitric oxide factory. Studies have shown that using mouthwash can spike your blood pressure within hours because your arteries lose their ability to dilate. If you are struggling with brain fog, throw away the mouthwash today. Use a saltwater rinse or an essential oil-based alternative that doesn't sterilize your biology. I want you to imagine yourself 30 days from today. Imagine waking up and feeling that clarity you haven't felt in a decade. Imagine being in a conversation and the words just flow. You don't have to fish for them. You don't have to apologize for your senior moments. This isn't a pipe dream. It is the result of feeding the engine. It is the result of clearing the fuel lines. But I have to tell you the truth. Clearing your carotids is only half the battle. Your brain needs blood flow, yes, but it also needs stable energy. If your carotids are wide open, but your insulin sensitivity is broken, you are just delivering toxic fuel to your brain faster. And that leads to a different kind of starvation, something we call type 3 diabetes. In fact, if you have clear carotids but high glycation, you're still at risk for the exact same memory loss Arthur was. And that is exactly why I spent the last 6 months investigating the glucose-brain link. The 30-year data on that system is even more shocking than what we discussed today. If you want to know the 2-minute home test to see if your heart and brain are truly in sync, I've put that research in this video right here on the screen. You need to see this to complete the protocol. I've put together a longevity cheat sheet with the specific K2 studies and the nitric oxide mouth-breathing protocols we covered. Would you like me to share the link in the comments? I'm Stephen Andrews, and I'll see you in the next investigation.